Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your rear brake pads and rotors. This is actually the rotor drum combo. This is the manual parking brake on a 2019 Mercedes Benz Sprinter van. And this is the 2500 with a 3-liter V6. Now, I just did the front pads and rotors on this exact same vehicle, and I'll get a link to that video in the description for you. But I wanted to point out the little wear sensor that we have here that you see clipped into this outside pad. This vehicle has 1 per axle. So I just did the right rear brakes on this, and there is not a wear sensor. And when I was doing the front, I noticed that it was only on the passenger side, so they're diagonal of each other. There's only 1 per axle. Now, the first thing I usually do is push the caliper piston back inside the caliper to make room for the thicker pad material. I like to use the pry bar method, where you put that through this little edge right here and pull that towards you, but the sensor here is in the way. So I'm going to try to get that removed and out of the way so I can do that. On the front, the sensor was really hard to get to. It would have been easier if you were trying to save the sensor to take the caliper off first, but there's just one little bolt right here. It's an E8 that holds this on. This little harness, I am going to just pull this off. This is just a little rubber cap over the bleeder screw, and I'm also just going to unplug this just by pulling it straight out. Now, this harness is free to be out of the way. If we can pry this out, it'll be out of the way, and we should be able to pry the caliper piston back in. So I'm just using a little flathead screwdriver in here. And there we go. All right, we got it out. The little metal ring kind of came off, but that, if you had to, could be reused. They do recommend changing these every time. So, you know, you might get lucky and be able to save these. But if you're doing this job and can plan ahead, I would go ahead and make sure you order the wear sensors too. Now, the kit that we got was just local from O'Reilly, and it actually came with sensors for both sides, even though we only needed 1. Before we go pushing or prying this back in, it's very important that you pop the hood and take a look and make sure that there's enough room in the master cylinder for the fluid that's going to be traveling backwards up through this line. And of course, there's lots of ways to do this. I prefer the pry bar method. It seems to go the quickest, but you can also take this off and use a C-clamp or the caliper wind back tool. You could also do the other method, which would be to crack open this bleeder screw and put a little tube on there, a little hose on there, and push the old fluid out as you push the caliper piston back in. That's fine too. It's a good way to cycle through your brake fluid, but keep in mind you do risk allowing air to enter the system, and you may have to bleed the brakes when you're done. The way that I'm doing it, we will not have to bleed the brakes when we're done. So let's go take a look up top and make sure that we have enough room in that master cylinder so we're not going to overflow that fluid. All right, so here's our master cylinder, and you can see that our fluid level is really low, way down here close to the minimum. That's actually good. That means that somebody has not been topping this off as the brakes have been wearing down. So we'll be able to push that fluid backwards without having to remove any fluid. A lot of people ask me if you need to take this lid off before pushing the caliper piston back in, and you really don't. There is maybe a little bit of trapped air in there, but because brake fluid absorbs moisture, it's hygroscopic. It basically absorbs moisture, and that causes it to degrade and go bad. So I like to not risk exposing that whenever possible to new air, which will have more moisture and it will absorb that moisture. So I usually like to keep that lid on unless we're having to remove any fluid or if we're changing the fluid. Again, you can also see that this fluid is pretty clean and clear, so we're just going to push that backwards through the system and we're good to go. So I just like to grab a little pry bar here. This is the Mayhew Dominator. Works pretty well. Just put it right in through this opening, and I'm just going to pull that towards me, and you'll see the caliper move on its slide pins. Now I'm shifting here in between the inside pad and the rotor so that we can continue to pry that and push the caliper piston all the way back in. Perfect. And you see we're pushed all the way back in. Now we have room for those thicker pads. All right, now we need to take off these caps here. The top one's a little bit different than the bottom. It's just a little cap so that we can get at that slide pin. And then pull this one off here too. These are a 6mm Allen or hex. And I'm just going to spin these off real quick. All right, now if you just kind of grab a hold of this, you can maybe get it out without having to take these out. But here's the top one. We'll set that aside. Now the bottom one's a little bit different. It's a different style. This is actually a slide pin combined with a bolt. I'm going to set this up here for right now. Just balance that on the rear leaf spring, and then we'll come back to those. Now we can pop out the old pads. Now we need to loosen and remove these 2 caliper bracket bolts, and these are 21mm. Can't quite get to this one here with the Milwaukee, so I'm going to see if I can break this one loose with a 1/2-inch breaker bar. There we go. Now you just want to have one hand on this bracket as you take these bolts out so it doesn't drop to the ground. Okay, now we can take off our rotor. Now that's held on by this bolt here, and that's a T30 Torx. Now before you take off this rotor, keep in mind it's also a drum. It's a parking brake drum / rotor combo. Make sure that your parking brake is off, otherwise you're gonna have a heck of a time trying to get this drum off. And you can see there's quite a bit of corrosion and rust on this hub, and even the tire was kind of difficult to get off. This is just this design. I don't know why they don't put some sort of a protectant on that. You know, this is in California. I can imagine in some areas where you have a lot of rust. We're just gonna give it a whack here with the Rotor Remover 9000 and see if we get lucky. Wow, we got it. If you have an electronic parking brake, that's going to be a little bit different. So just make sure that you do order the right parts. In our case, this is the disc drum combo because this is our parking brake shoes right here. And so far, those actually look like they're in good shape, so we're not going to mess with those. We'll just clean this up a little bit. Now, before I put on the new rotor, I'm going to hit this with a wire wheel and just try to clean off as much of this rust and corrosion as I can. And we'll put some anti-seize on here too, and then we'll clean off those parking brakes. Just make sure if you're going to use a drill and a wire wheel like this that you wear some safety glasses. We're going to put some anti-seize on here. Now, before we put the rotor on, these are packed in some oil to protect them or prevent them from rusting. Just going to hit that with some brake parts cleaner as well. Make sure we wipe out the inside of that drum as well. Now, when you put this on, just try to line up the little hole there. All right, now this little bolt that holds the rotor on with the little T30, believe it or not, there's a little bit of thread locker on there, or remnants of thread locker. So I'm just gonna put another drop or two of this blue medium strength thread locker on there. You could also just cross thread it when you're putting it back on, that'll hold it on. If you're wondering, there actually is a torque spec I found on this. It's 14 foot-pounds, which is about right there. All right, now we're gonna get this bracket cleaned up and ready to go back on. So we're gonna change all of these abutment clips, just pop them out one at a time. And here I'm going to use the wire wheel to clean these little spots right here. You can see some corrosion starting. Just make sure you wear those safety glasses. Now, before I put the new clips on, I like to brush these with a little bit of protective grease, and that's just to prevent rust and build up underneath there. It's more of a protectant than a lubricant. It helps prevent that corrosion that builds up underneath those clips and causes it to bind. Then we'll just pop on these new clips. Sometimes the aftermarket clips are a pain, sometimes they cooperate. These ones don't look too bad. You can see they're all a mirror image. Just make sure that you put the right one in the right spot so that these little tabs are facing out. There we go. Now, before I put the caliper bracket back on, I'm going to clean off these bolts here real quick. Now, Mercedes says to replace these bolts every time you do the brake job. They only say to replace the back ones, even though they look identical to the front, but they say that these are torque to yield. So you're supposed to torque this to 59 foot-pounds and then an additional 45 degrees, but I'm not replacing them. I don't have new bolts. We're just gonna put these ones back in and I think we'll be fine. If you want to replace them, that's up to you, but we're gonna reuse them on this one. There we go. And we can put the caliper bracket back up here and we'll get these bolts started. I'm just going to zip these on first with this. Now, I don't have a torque wrench that is digital or fancy or will tell you the degree of the turn, but what we are going to do is just go 59 foot-pounds, and then I'm going to just do an additional 45 degrees, which is about an hour and a half. If you were just to imagine a bolt is a face of a clock, each hour is about 30 degrees. So if you were to go an hour and a half, that's 45. So you kind of have to either imagine or eyeball that. You're just looking at a clock, but let's get these torqued to 59 first. Now I'm going to use the 1/2-inch breaker bar. I know you're looking at an angle, but I'm almost straight on here, and that's really close to 12 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that to between 10 and 11 o'clock, and that should give me that 45 degrees. Now we're almost there, but I ran out of room here because of the inside of the fender. So that was just under an hour. Hopefully you're following me and this doesn't sound stupid, but if it does, that's okay. Okay, I'm good with that. Let's do the same for the upper one. All right, now if you see this, I know we're just a little bit past 9 o'clock if you're to visualize a clock face. So I just need to get this right down, almost right between 7 and 8, maybe a little bit closer to 7. So let's go ahead and give that a go. Right there. Now I know that's not a real scientific way, but it seems to work okay for me. All right, and then we can put the new pads in, just kind of at an angle, seems to work the best. All right, now I'm gonna brush the outside of these pads with this Permatex Silicone Ceramic Extreme. This is a really good damper of noise. It seems to really keep these quiet. Really doesn't take too much, a little thin layer here on the back. Basically, it's where the caliper is gonna squeeze onto those pads. All we need is a little thin layer in there. It seems to help cut down on some of the vibrations that cause noise. That should be good. All right, now I'm gonna clean these slide pins. You can see that they're different. You see this one here is the slide pin that just stays here on the caliper itself. And then this one is a slide pin bolt that just goes through here. So we are gonna take these out and clean and re-grease them. I'm just gonna use the leaf spring here as a little bit of a workbench. So I'm gonna pull this one out first. Just pull back that rubber boot and pull this through. That's pretty clean, but it doesn't really have much grease, so I'm gonna make sure that we put more grease on here before we put that back in. I'm gonna use this same silicone based, this is by VersaChem. This is really good for caliper slide pins. It's a synthetic base, so it won't get gummy or get stuck. I'm just gonna push this one right back through the same direction and make sure that we catch that shoulder right there. That looks good. Now on this one, I'm just gonna push it all the way through, like so. And we're gonna get this one all cleaned up. Now, same thing, this one doesn't have a lot of grease on it. The end here is kind of gummed up where it was sticking out, so we do need to make sure we clean all of that off. All right, we'll just grease this one up as well. Just a nice good coating of this stuff. Don't need to get too carried away, but want to make sure that those will slide easily so that our brakes don't bind or get hung up. And this one I'm gonna push through from the back, just all the way through till it sticks out that boot and catches that lip right there. So I'm just gonna use a couple drops of this blue medium strength on the end of this bolt here, just about out of this stuff. And I'm also gonna put a couple drops here on this bolt. This one here is like a slide pin bolt combo, and this one here is just a bolt that goes through the slide pin, just a slightly different design. Now, just real quick, probably should have done this before putting that thread lock on there, but I also like to brush some of this junk off of this caliper and inspect the face, just make sure that that looks good, but this looks all right. Okay. All right, now I just pushed this slide pin all the way through so that it's just the boot now here. Now we should be able to line this up. And the top one, same thing, you might have to push the slide pin in as you do this to get it lined up. Same with the bottom one here. I'm really trying to make sure that I push that boot in so we don't damage it. Let's get the top one started first. You see our boot is kind of folded right there. Just make sure that you push in on that boot while you push this on, and then we should be able to get these started. Okay, and then we can torque these to 25 foot-pounds. All right, and then we can put these caps back on, and then the one on the bottom. Okay, and now for the little sensor here, just line that up with the edge of the pad. There's a little cutout, and just press it in until it clicks, just like that. And then over here, we can clip this little rubber cap around the harness that holds it in place. And here, just make sure you line up these two. There's just two little metal prongs, and it just pushes in. Just push it straight in all the way, like that. Then we can put back this little bolt right here. This is the E-Torx head. It's a E8, and we'll just make that snug. I think there is a torque spec on this. I think it's like 6 foot-pounds, but obviously it's really small, so don't get too crazy. Don't break that. Just make it snug. And you're done. Now, it's very important before you head out, you do need to step on the brake pedal several times, which will push the caliper piston back out, pressing those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Now, when you do this, don't press the brake pedal all the way to the floor. You can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just press it down about halfway several times until it feels firm, and double check your master cylinder. Make sure that the brake fluid is all topped off where it needs to be. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description where you can pick up some of these same exact parts and tools that I used in the video. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.